And if you're out there getting food, come on in. Hi, Kelly. Welcome, everybody, to welcome to Trinity Law School. Most of you know Trinity Law School very well. And to this event, Voices of Resilience. Thanks for being here. I'm Andrew DeLoach. I'm a professor at Trinity Law School. I'm also the director of our Center for Human Rights, which is a research and education and advocacy center. We do things like offer numerous human rights courses, research and work opportunities for students, and events like this one. I would also like to say thank you to our co-sponsor, the Christian Legal Society. And I want to invite Matthew Jones up to say just a very quick word about some of their upcoming events.
Yeah, thanks for letting us sponsor. We just have a few events. We do a, if you're not on the email list, then get on it and you'll find out what our events are. But no, we have a monthly Bible study, and the next one's going to be April 9th. That's at my office in Irvine, not too far from UCI. And then we have one on May 14th as well. It's the second Thursday of each month. There are other speaking events that are coming up. Those will be on the email list as well. There's one at the Lincoln Club. I'm not sure if that's open to the public or not. And then there's Myron, who's Myron Stevens, the prior dean of this law school. He is speaking at the CLS student chapter at UCI in May. And actually that might be the middle of April. And then but the big social event that we have coming up is in May. It's May 21st. It's more of a happy hour, and it'll be at an event to be determined down by the beach. So come join us.
Thanks. Before I introduce our speaker, I just have two quick announcements about the format, I suppose, for the event. I will introduce our speaker, and then after her talk, she and I will sit down for a little bit of discussion and some Q&A. You should have a note card and a pen. Those are for questions if you have them. And at the end of the talk, we'll come around and grab those from you, and I will ask your questions from the chairs up front. So if you do have questions, write them down on the card rather than raising a hand. Our speaker, Jacqueline Isaac, has been here before. We were just discussing her last appearance here in 2019. She's a graduate of Vanguard University and the University of San Diego Law School. She's an international lawyer, humanitarian, and also the vice president of Roads of Success, which is an NGO serving women, persecuted minorities, and survivors of war. She's spoken before the United States Congress, the UN Security Council, the European Parliament, and various other government bodies, all with respect to her experiences on the front lines with survivors of ISIS captivity and persecuted religious minorities. She helped push through a unanimous resolution at the UK Parliament and the US Congress that declared that ISIS had indeed committed genocide against Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities, ethnic minorities. Her team has also collected evidence for ISIS and other terrorist crimes against Christians in Syria. And she's been featured on numerous global media platforms, from the BBC to TED, championing justice for survivors of this kind of serious mass violence. She's also served as an adjunct professor of war crimes just up the road at Pepperdine Law School, and as an advisor for the U.S. Homeland Security Department. And we're delighted to have Ms. Isaac back at Trinity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. DeLoach. It's so good to be back here. It's been many years. We just figured it out. It was 2019, last time we were here. This time I got great Middle Eastern food, which was a great, great plus after a drive from San Diego. And we know about California traffic. But it's really good to be here. And I just want to start by saying just the fact that you all are here today, that contributes a lot. It shows that you're interested in humanity, that you care. And as a Christian, that you want to take a role, take a stand. And it always begins by awareness. When we don't know something, how can we help? How can we aid? How can we use our tools? Can't. So first, thank you. Thank you to the dean. Thank you for everyone that's here. So I'm going to get started with a story. And I want to show a clip of that story, and then I'll explain further.
This is St. John Mountain. I've met the girls that have been kidnapped and raped by ISIS. And I'm telling you that we need to give them seeds of hope.
The difficulty is that, of course, you're here in an atmosphere in which there's great fear of migrants, refugees, on a huge scale.
These are young girls that can be our daughters, girls that can be our sisters. When you start to think of it like that, you're putting a face on the numbers.
This evidence, what you see here, has to be preserved. It is the responsibility of the entire world to make sure that it's preserved.
What is justice?
It's a hope that one day I can start again. I can trust my neighbor. I believe betrayed me. I can believe that there's a future for my generation to come, not to be always afraid that it could happen to my daughter, that history can repeat itself. I really think that one day our children or grandchildren, they're going to be studying what happened in history books, and they're going to ask, what did you do? And I hope we have an answer for it.
We love very much the course.
You love the chorus. So they learn English over the internet. These are tutors.
Wednesday's group therapy and Saturday's English classes.
The first program, I don't know speak and I don't know write, but now I know the story.
You speak, you write, and it's kind of a new beginning.
Hi, Susan. How are you? Are you ready to sing? Yeah. I have a dream, a song to sing, to help me go.
Every time I watch that, it makes me want to cry. But it's a combination of the sadness of the story, but also happy tears to see what an end result can look like when it comes to justice. What does justice look like? And before we go into the legalities, I'm going to share with you a journey that we went on. But before I do, I just want to say something. As a person, as a human, I found working with victims and survivors over and over that this is true. Justice looks different for every single one of them. We know traditional justice, and we will use our tools and our gifts to fight for that traditional justice. But to be able to recognize the person in front of you and understand what their definition of justice looks like is very important. Because it could be that there is a campaign to get genocide resolutions, in which we're going to talk about in a moment. But it could be that survivor one wants to go to court and have her day in court. But another one might feel like she's pressured into it. So she gives her word because of the community putting pressure internationally and locally. And so one thing I've found is when you work with survivors, you really have to start at a human level, at a very human level, to say, okay, what does this young woman or young man, what do they need? What do they want? Because what I found with survivors, that some wanted that traditional justice, others didn't want anyone to know their name or to be seen, but they wanted to get that day in court at a certain point, but they had to wait. Others didn't want any of it. They just wanted to start school again and continue and erase the memory. So for me, the journey started actually in Southern California. I was here with my mom as part of the foundation Roads of Success, and we were hearing about what was happening in the Middle East when ISIS invaded. Specifically, if you recall, there were images in Sinjar Mountain of women and girls and children all running up to this mountain, and they so wanted water, just some water, because days they were escaping from ISIS. And helicopters were dispatching, and they were throwing, I don't know if you remember these scenes, but they were throwing bottles of water and food, and everyone was fighting for the food and water. And we were watching these images on TV, local TV here in California. It was in San Diego. And we wanted to help, but we didn't know how. We were having an event at the time. And at this event, we were focusing in on helping Iraqi refugees, teenage refugees, that they came to San Diego, fleeing the war earlier on, years before, during the days of Saddam Hussein and all of these incidences that took place. And incredible, when you actually reach out and try to figure it out, somehow these doors open. During this time, we connected with several people that had access into Iraq during the war. This was the height of the war. We're now talking about end of 2014. By this point, the Yazidi people, if you don't know who they are, they're an ethnic minority and a religious minority. And they have had about 75 genocides in their history. And these people, on August 3rd, 2014, they were there living their lives, and ISIS came and invaded. And they took the men, they beheaded the men in front of the women, and then they took the girls, a lot of them you saw today, they took the girls, they put them in ISIS captivity, and they enslaved them sexually. They would force them to take birth control. They would put them in a situation of torture, not just by them themselves, but also the ISIS wives. So they're not just dealing with the torture and the trauma of seeing their family members not only separated, but killed in front of them. But now they're dealing with the rape, the enslavement, and then the torture from the wives. Unbelievable. So here we are, we're at the end of 2014. We fly to Iraq for a humanitarian aid campaign. At this point, no one is speaking about the women and girls that are enslaved. We just know ISIS has invaded. We just see war and havoc, but we don't understand the details. So we're going there, we're providing the humanitarian aid. One of the shipments we had sent from Long Beach, California, actually, got blocked in Turkey because of some of the incidences with ISIS along the way. The shipments come in. We distribute in displaced persons camps for Yazidis, but also for Christians who had the same type, I can't say same because they were completely different facts, but the same, the idea of the targeting, ISIS coming in to cities like Kojo, to Mosul, to Nineveh, and also targeting the Christian people, taking girls as slaves as well, doing horrible things to the churches, destroying the churches, taking the crosses and breaking them, killing people. So all of this is happening, and we don't understand what's really going on because you're in the middle of war. You're just in the middle of war. So you just see a lot of dead people, a lot of people that are displaced. You're not understanding the entire story. Well, while we were there, on one of the end of that trip, I was in an elevator on my way home. About to go home. The night before I left, there was an elevator. And in the elevator was a woman. And she had dockets, files. And I was curious. I asked her, "You're working hard? What are those?" She just asked. And she said, "Come, I'll tell you." She sits me down in the living room. She was exhausted. It was a lobby, sorry, of a hotel. Completely exhausted. She says, "You know what these files are? These files," and she whispers. She doesn't say it loudly. She says, "These files are files of names of girls and women that were enslaved by ISIS sexually." And it was whispered. Why? Can anybody answer that? Because of stigma. The stigma was so real for women and girls from the Yazidi community and Christian community that were raped and enslaved, that when they escaped, if they escaped, because many didn't, if they escaped, many decided to commit suicide because they were so afraid of what would happen if they come back to a community that disqualifies them, that say that they are ones to be dishonored and that they are dishonoring the community. It's a very real thing. What chances would they have at marriage? What chances would they have to begin again? And so many of them at this point are killing themselves. So this woman was an employee working for the government of Iraq. And this was her responsibility, to take on these cases and try to rehabilitate. And she said, "Anything you guys can do to bring help, to tell the world, tell the world." So that's a pretty heavy weight on your shoulder. You know, you're in the middle of the war and you're thinking about what's next. So we still had not met these girls. At this point, it's just whispers. We come back to the United States and we start talking. In between, we do another trip. And we're told that we can meet a group of about 30 girls. Such an honor, such an honor. 14 years old, 15 years old, just children, they're teenagers. And here they are with a smile, some of them with a smile on their face. Happy to see an Egyptian, by the way, because we happen to be the comedians in the Middle East. And we start joking around and doing, just girl time. And then they start talking. And one of those young women raises her hand and she says, can I say something? And can you get it on video? So we take a little camera. It was an iPhone or whatever it was back then. And we take the phone and we record. And she says, "Whether I live or whether I die, I want to save my sisters out of captivity. And I will tell the world." She just raises her hand like that. And I take the statement. Meanwhile, I'm a lawyer, but I'm also an Egyptian-American. So I'm connecting on a family level. And at the same time, I still don't understand the magnitude of the crime. We just have a group of 30 girls. Later find out that the number is between 5,000 to 7,000 girls and women, some as young as 9 years old, that were taken. And why? Because of their faith, because of what they believed. And ISIS knew very well what they were doing. They understood the power of using rape to destroy a community that has this concept of stigma and dishonor when a woman is sexually enslaved. And you saw that in their propaganda. They had created a market using WhatsApp to sell the girls. And there were actual wording, which ended up being evidence of why they were selling them and who they were. And they were infidels over and over. So this is all happening. We're starting to learn what is going on. I come here to Orange County, and I'm invited to an event where Chairman of the United States Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, was there. If you know who he is, he's here in Orange County. And we start talking, tell him about the trips. And he asks me a question. He says, is this to the level of a genocide? From what I saw at this point, what I heard, I said, yes, absolutely. He says, okay, we're going to have an open hearing. He calls DC, and he has one of the very first open hearings on this matter. And I bring that video, the video of the young girl raising her hand and saying that she wants to save her sisters. At that time, 21 Coptic Christians, Egyptian Christians that were in Libya were massacred by ISIS, if you remember that display on the beach. And they were killed, executed, and those videos went viral. So all of this is happening, and you can see the patterns of evidence. You can see what's happening. And at this point, we had a decision to make. Could we, with what we had in terms of connections and conversations in the Middle East, so just a segue, my mother is a Christian Arabic television show host. So she had been very well known all over the Middle East, reaching millions of people till today in the Arabic-speaking world. So a lot of the Syrian Christians were connecting with her during the wars. And again, in Syria, ISIS had also invaded, and so had al-Nusra. And in fact, the State Department said during that time there was 1,500 different terrorist groups in Syria. So she was going to try to bring awareness to her audiences. But during this time, after the congressional hearing in the United States, we were then asked, bless you, at the UK Parliament to come to bring stories. At the UK Parliament at this point, the UK House of Lords, they had a hearing. And the question was, is this a genocide? Are ISIS's actions actually at the threshold constituting a genocide? Did they really have the intent to destroy in whole or in part these Yazidi communities, these Christian communities and other minorities? And so the House of Lords, the decision was, this is something of judicial determination. We're not going to decide this. About a couple weeks later, we're asked to come back for another hearing in the House of Commons this time. Has a lot more weight to actually determine the same question. Is this at the level of a genocide? This time, we brought that young woman that was on video at the US Congress. And she came and she spoke the night before the vote. My mother, who had been in Syria, recorded so many stories that were also brought to be seen, to be shown the night before the vote. That led to the vote being unanimous. Every single person in that parliament declared that genocide had occurred against these religious minorities. Why is this all important? I'm storytelling, right? We're in law school. The reason why is because you have to understand the power of advocacy. There is power in advocacy. And it's always the beginning, because when you're dealing with such atrocities, if you do not have political will, if you don't have nations that actually want to move forward to declare something, a genocide, the crime of all crimes, you don't have much to work with. You might have all the facts and all the proof, but if you don't have political will, you're missing a very big piece. So after these genocide resolutions passed all over, at this point, genocide resolutions were being passed in the European Parliament. The United Nations, different agencies started making statements. France decided to actually refer to the Security Council Syria in 2014. It failed because of China and Russia. But all of this was happening. But you saw that when genocide resolutions were declared, what came after? That political will, there's now a responsibility. There's a convention, 1948, that says that there is a duty to prevent and punish when they declare genocide. So now aid is rolling in from the United States government. Now the UK feels responsible to aid and to fund. And you're starting to see the world take the responsibility because they've said it. Then we go to 2017. We have a problem. Evidence needs to be collected. We've said genocide, but now how do we actually prove it in the court of law? Well, the problem was there were so many mass graves at this point, and very, very difficult to get access to hardcore evidence without funding and without a mechanism. So because of political will, a tribunal was not created. But what we were able to achieve at that time was in 2017, the United Nations Security Council voted on a mechanism, an evidentiary mechanism to collect evidence specifically on war crimes, looking at genocide crimes. And in that, there were stories of girls and women who had been raped and enslaved, had the issue of stigma, a lot of them afraid to speak up. So what we did is we started to work with the UK government. There was a department created by Angelina Jolie and William Hague at the time. So it was the only department in any government around the world that existed like this. And it was called the Prevention of Sexual Violence and Conflict. I'm board member until today of that committee. The reason why I was so proud of the people there in that committee was because they understood that in order to get justice, if it was true, in fact, that these girls and women were targeted and raped because of the fact that they came from the ethnic group, the Yazidis, or the Christian group, the religious group, the Christians, if they can actually prove that even rape was a part of a pattern to destroy in whole or in part, that would be a part of the genocide evidence that needed to be proved later on so that this doesn't keep happening again and again. So one of the most important things, I'm going to leave you with this today before we go into the Q&A. One of the most important things I want you to hear today is, as you know, with genocide, there has to be intent to destroy in whole or in part, the mens rea, right? And that's something that's usually very, very hard to prove unless there's official propaganda, actual written statements. So what I want to do is I want to read to you some of those statements by ISIS. Okay. So this was to prove the mens rea, and we had this brief that I have in my hand today. This went to the UK Parliament, to every member in the House of Commons before they had the vote. And in it, in October 2014, ISIS-Daesh published the 4th issue of Dabiq. So Dabiq was a magazine that ISIS would publish to try to recruit more people. And they had a cover photo showing a black ISIS flag flying over the Vatican. And the message was this: "We will conquer you, Rome. Break your crosses and enslave your women by the permission of Allah the Exalted. If we do not reach that time, then our children and grandchildren will reach it, and they will sell your sons as slaves in the slave market. Again, in February 2015, that same magazine published an article on ISIS Daesh capturing 21 Coptic Christians, confirming ISIS's specific plan. This is what they said. This month, the soldiers of the Wilayat captured 21 Coptic crusaders, the ones I spoke about earlier. Almost 5 years after the blessed operation against the Baghdad church, executed in revenge, there's some more facts here, in revenge for Camila and Wafa, other sisters who were tortured and murdered by the Coptic Church of Egypt. Again, they say in one of their statements, go forth for jihad. And it goes on and on and on and on. These statements clearly show that they want those that have the cross to be destroyed. In whole or in part, we found that evidence for the Yazidis and for the Christians. And today, as we speak, in different courts around the world, they have found some of these perpetrators in various countries like Germany, like Sweden, where they've been able to capture them. And because this evidence was documented, they were able to prove that they truly did do what they say that they did. And that adds to the evidence that proves actually indeed genocide occurred in Iraq and in Syria. And if I were just to leave you with anything here, just remember that these girls, these women that I met, this wasn't a part of just war and rape. This was part of a systematic pattern to destroy these groups based on what they believe. And if we don't deal with stigma, if we don't deal with it at a very primitive level, we're going to get nowhere. So in Iraq, in Syria, in Congo, in Sudan, today, we have a declaration called the Declaration of Humanity. We'll talk about it in the Q&A if we have a chance. But they actually created a document where religious leaders are signing on to the document, promising a commitment to try to end the stigma. And so they use their religious platforms to speak and say that these girls, these women that were enslaved are to be honored. We are to support them. We are to help them with their education. We are to do everything we can, including dismantling harmful interpretations of our religious texts, which was crucial. To understand, to give you a little bit more of that, it wasn't just Yazidis that were dealing with the stigma. Christians were dealing with the stigma, and it was very real. There were girls that I personally met that came out of captivity, told to be under house arrest, told by priests in the church that if they were to speak up, there would be consequences, questioning whether they were raped or whether they voluntarily had sex with these perpetrators. This was something really going on. The switch is at the head of the Yazidi faith, which I'm just so proud of that this happened. He issued a fatwa, a religious decree that said for the girls, for the women that have been enslaved and that were in ISIS captivity, now, there was a theory prior that said if they had sexual intercourse with someone from another religion, they are no longer Yazidi. That was the first fatwa before the war. After the war, with all the momentum and the awareness and the advocacy and the signatures to the declaration, that religious leader, the head religious leader of the Yazidi faith, said the exact opposite. And he said they are to be honored and we are to put them above us. And that shifted everything. Women and girls began to speak. They spoke up. They felt comfortable. Same with the Christians. When the Yazidi leader had a shift, the Christian leaders had a shift because they felt that they can safely tell their girls and women, you are to be honored. But it's a mindset change. So more and more women are coming up now and saying, we have a story we want to tell. And again, ending it with justice. What does it look like for them? For some, it's going on the media, and their evidence won't be used in court. For another, it's actually getting that day in court. One of these girls spoke up because of that Yazidi leader that gave that fatwa. And when she spoke, she got her day in court. I wish I had this video. She got her day in court in Iraq, and she got to face her perpetrator. And she took a moment and she looked him straight in the eyes. And when she did, he looked down. His eyes went like this. And she said, no, when I look at you and I talk to you, you look up at me. And he kind of starts to look up at her and she goes, do you know what you've done? Do you understand what you've done? No, you don't understand let me tell you what you've done. And she gets her moment and she speaks and he starts tearing. And at that moment, when she was there and she spoke to her perpetrator and faced him, she was a symbol for the thousands that were enslaved. It was a moment of justice. But she had to be quiet for years to be able to get that day in court with proper documentation and in a way where that evidence would not be compromised. So I will leave you with that. And just, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So we have probably about 20 minutes before we need to wrap this up. If you have questions that you've written down on your note cards, please feel free to hand them to the center, and our lovely volunteers will collect those and bring them up to me. One of the things I love about your work is your focus on survivors. In my exposure to human rights law and organizations involved in all manner of human rights advocacy and things like this, you actually surprisingly find few organizations that are so focused on survivors. And so I want to ask you, what is it that survivors most need and most want in terms of not just justice, but in terms of ground level personal support?
Yeah, it's a good question. When we first talked about when they first came out of captivity and they sat with us at the time at a park, and the first thing I noticed is that they just want to be human and they just want to make human connection. They don't want to be a number. They don't want to be considered one of the survivors, one of the victims, and that's it. That's who they are. That is very important. And they choose, by the way, if they want to call themselves survivors or victims, which is a long debated issue. But we've come to the place in the Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict Initiative to embrace both and to allow survivors to be called either, depending on what they think they see is fit for them. So what I've noticed is that they need to be able to have the tools to start again. And one of the things we talked about today was stigma. Stigma is a major issue. So if they come into the community and they're rejected, they won't get jobs, they won't get married, they won't be able to be accepted in society. And it just is a self-fulfilling cycle. So from the beginning, what I see is it's not just the evidence. You have to give them tools to be empowered. So schools, for example, major issue. Why? During the war, a lot of school certificates that proved how far these girls and women went in terms of their schooling, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 7th grade, that's destroyed. So you imagine you're about to start high school, or you're about to start college. You don't have the ability to prove that you have gone through all of these grades. So I found for survivors, they need to get the help. There needs to be organizations. There needs to be an ability for the school systems to work around that. And we saw that in Germany, when a lot of Yazidis went to Germany, the German schools found a program to accelerate their education as quickly as possible and get them to the place that if it wasn't that they would have been pretty close. So having that openness, to give the schooling. Eduardo, my husband, my wonderful husband, who I love very much, I met, and thank you for being here. I met him because of this work, because he had offered at the time, I was in London speaking at an Alpha conference, and he had offered to help with wellness, just wellness techniques to help peace of mind using scriptures, to just try to help them to get to a place where they can sleep at night. Counseling, psychological support. And some, again, when we talked about justice, some want to go on the media. So let's say you have a girl or a woman that wants to go on the media. Most likely, she's not going to be able to have a good day in court because you have so much evidence and the memory of a human being. You might have said something on BBC, said something else on ABC, and now you're in court, and you have every argument is just they're trying to cancel it because of the contradicting statements. So really see as an organization or as a lawyer, what do they really want? Is it media? Okay, if it is, this is the consequence. They need to know that. And if it's evidence, and if you want your day in court, you need to also understand that it could be years and maybe never. You may never go to court. They may never find your perpetrator. So you have a responsibility to give enough information, because what happened in the Yazidi and Christian communities, when these wars broke out, the first thing they wanted, because of what they hear, just because of what they hear, not because of necessarily what's true or not, we need genocide declarations. We need genocide declarations. We need genocide. Okay, my cousin told me that if I'll get the genocide declaration, if I give my evidence to this organization that's, and you started to see this chaos happening. And there was an amazing survivor named Nadia Murad who had to deal with this. And actually she developed internationally. I actually think she was a fellow, I want to say at Chapman University. She came here for Chapman for a semester. But all the international experts came alongside of her, and they developed something called the Murad Code, which had a lot of the do not harm principles, so that when you approach a witness, you understand what you're doing and you do it carefully, meticulously, and you make sure that another interview hasn't been done. So there's much to be said, but you can see as I'm saying this, it's a holistic approach. They need everything.
Right.
And so if we take one side of it, just one side of the piece of the puzzle, you can actually hurt their chances, not just at justice, but at their future.
Sure.
A
lot of what you're doing seems to be focused on post-conflict work, but I tend to see it as preventative work as well. What you're doing now with one conflict is ideally preventing the same thing from happening again in the future. One of our audience questions asks what can be done prevention-wise at the local level, and I think this is a really frequent question that I hear in these discussions. Even though you have people asking for declarations, and I want my day at the ICC, it takes a lot to get that far. What are some of the challenges, the legal challenges to preventing crimes like this from occurring, particularly at the local level, and what, if anything, can be done?
Yeah. That's a hard question.
Yeah.
I think that if we understand not just stigma, but when you're dealing with religious minorities, when you're dealing with Christians in the Middle East, for example, or you're dealing with Yazidis, Turkmen, there is something that has been instilled from generation to generation to generation, which is if you speak up locally, you will have consequences that not necessarily the international world can help with. And there's a lot of distrust when it comes to the governments. So what they'll say to you or say to ADF or say to me, for example, they will not say if a government agency or even the UN Refugee Agency came up and said, what's your story? They may not feel comfortable enough to say. The answer goes back to political will. The United Nations Security Council, I want to say it was around 2020, decided to have something called an area formula meeting. It was a special meeting, special session. And the question was, how could the role of religious leaders prevent these types of atrocities from happening? It was a very real conversation using examples of how priests who had been side by their Sunni clerics, for example, for years and years and years, when war came, it was the Sunni clerics because of the friendship that can go back to the community and say, don't kill these people. Don't hurt these people. So what we found there, again, China and Russia and India were objecting during that Security Council session. But it was very, very important to show the nations that if you don't get religious leaders, why do I keep saying religious leaders? Here we live in America, right? So we have all different kinds of leaders in our country. But when you're dealing with the Middle East, when you're dealing with these contexts, religious leaders are everything.
Right.
If they say one word locally, it is the word of the land. And it will be prevented. It can be prevented. And you see that in the cases of Iraq and Syria time and time again. So my answer is get it done through the community leaders. And when a high level, like the Security Council level, when they are talking about these types of subjects that the religious leaders may have been afraid of, when they're talking at that level, they may be more comfortable to speak at home about it.
Sure. I think we probably have time for, I'll push it, 2 more. Because I know you could go for a couple more hours, and I would listen for a couple more hours. You were talking early about neighbors and some of the girls that you were meeting, and I don't know why, but it brought to mind a book that I read a few years ago called Love Thy Neighbor by, I think he's a New York Times journalist, Peter Mass. About the Bosnia War. And in this book, he's essentially detailing stories of neighbors who were friends in Bosnia until this conflict broke out. In fact, I think he tells one story about 2 friends who were talking, across town or so with a 2-way radio. And the very next day were attempting to kill one another because of the ethnic divide in this conflict. And so listening to your stories, and as you've listened to all of these stories and met with these young girls and women, what does love of neighbor look like in a post-conflict zone like this? Is that even possible? What does it take to repair the relationship among neighbors? When there's probably a high degree of distrust and fear and stigma standing in the way of that.
Yeah. At the end of the day, when you sit over and over in a place, on a table, and have a meal, sounds so basic, right? Yeah. Have a meal over and over with people that you considered an enemy.
Yeah.
Over time, because you can't go from 75 genocides in the Yazidi community to then trusting people that they may have considered to have been affiliated, which, by the way, was a big deal in Iraq, affiliated with ISIS. A lot of the Sunni Muslim neighbors, we don't know for sure, but we heard many stories that the neighbors told on some of these Yazidis, and the timing was off. They thought that ISIS wasn't there yet, but ISIS was coming. Many stories of betrayal that I've heard from the Yazidi community about the neighbors. Right. It takes time to coexist together and for different players to be willing to take one step. Will you have a meal with me? Will you have a meal? That's all I want. A meal. Tomorrow, let's have a tea. The next day, let's bring our kids together to play. And the kids start creating a bond. And it's over time. My parents in Egypt, my parents are Egyptian. My parents remember a day in Egypt where they were all best friends. Didn't matter who they were. So time repairs.
Yeah.
And taking that step to say, okay, can I talk to my enemy?
To rebuild personal relationships at a low level. Yeah, that's great. Last question, just because we don't have time for more. You probably would have expected one of these from a group of law students. How does someone get into this line of work? And together with that, how does someone manage the emotional and the psychological toll that this must take on you, this line of work?
It does, and it has, at times where I was over and over, you're hearing stories. It gets to you.
Yeah.
It gets to you. It's called secondary trauma. It happens, And I think that you have to be very realistic with yourself to say, okay, am I called to this? Is this something, just as a believer right now I'm speaking of, am I called to this?
Sure.
Is this something that I'm called to? Because we hear a lot of causes and a lot of things going around the world. And we want to get involved and do everything, right? But ask the Lord, what am I called to? Start there. For me, I could have done the conventional route. I could have worked at a big international organization. When I was at USC, School of Law. At the time, I had one human rights class, life-changing human rights class. And the only one at the time, I think, that they allowed at USC, because there was this big push for students to get into, the corporate world and so forth. But great school, by the way. But I had this one professor that pushed me to do the non-conventional thing. And I remember, he said, doesn't your parents have a humanitarian organization? Your mom already has a show. Why don't you just use what you already have? You have these connections in the Middle East. You care about the Middle East. You don't need to go work at the UN at a desk job on an entry point level and be doing paperwork for years. Just you have the skills, go for it. He pushed me. So I would say to each one of you here today, think outside the box. Think outside the box. You could go the conventional route. You could work for the United Nations. I did a great internship in Egypt when I was a law student. I'm so happy I did it. But think of the different ways you can do it, applying for an international organization or UN or whatever you want to do. But you can also think outside of the box. What can I do with my skills, my contacts, my relationships, my family's? You don't know, like Chairman Ed Royce, for example. Someone knew him and connected us in Orange County. It was because of that contact that led to that hearing in the US Congress. Yeah, so just go outside the box.
Well, thank you very much for making the trip up here. Thanks for bringing your husband.
Thank you.
We love having you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. And thank you for having me here. It was wonderful. And thank you for all that
Please help yourself to some food.
I'll have
Thanks, everybody.
more.
I wanted to point out one thing before you leave, captive audience. We have another event coming up next month, a book event as well. So it'll be similar to this with a lecture and then a conversation. Our speaker is Jonathan Green, who I met at Georgetown, and he's a brilliant scholar. He's going to be talking about judicial activism at the Israeli Supreme Court, but also the U.S. Supreme Court and the European Court of Human Rights. So another free event for you guys if you're interested. Thank you, everybody. Eat our food.
I will.